And that's what climate change is about. It is literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
That's right, Greta, you pint-sized protagonist. It is Friday, and this is our own personal Friday climate protest, now under a new name, Climate Realism Show, episode 102, Climate Fact Check. I'm your host, Anthony Watt, Senior Fellow for Environment and Climate at the Heartland Institute. Joining me today, we have one of our regular panelists, Linnea Lueken, Robinson Center Research Fellow, and special guest, Steve Milloy of junkscience.com. Welcome, guys. How are you?
Hey, Anthony, thanks for having me.
Glad to have you both on today. We're going to get to our main topic momentarily, which is climate fact check, and we've also got a little climate potpourri going on. But first, we want to start off with crazy climate news, some of the nuttiest, eye-rolling stuff that's been on the internet through the past week. First of all, Rivian. Rivian has created an environmental disaster on their scuttled factory site. Apparently, they weren't paying attention to drainage, and what's happening is that they cleared the land, and for this big factory, and which isn't going to be built because Rivian's on the way out, like many EV companies, and all of the silt and so forth is polluting the groundwater, and residents around the area are upset, and the government's doing nothing about it. Where's the EPA when we need them, Steve?
Where is the EPA? Yeah, it's funny. So I've been working on these environmental issues for more than 30 years. I have yet to see anything green actually be green. It always winds up in disaster.
Indeed. It seems like every time the EV company does something, it's a misstep. They seem to get their ducks in a row. Yeah. Anyway, now speaking of EVs, now this is funny. This is from the Chico Enterprise record, and it's talking about the owner of an electric bike, and the headline is, "Bike battery dies, left in orchard, owner returns with trailer to find it stolen." And while we can't really read the whole article, further down it says, in Durham, a Rad Rover 6 electric bicycle was reported stolen near an orchard. The owner said he ran out of battery power and then hid it in the orchard. But then when he returned a half an hour later with a trailer to pick it up, it was gone.
Yeah, so I guess they're lucky that it didn't blow up. I mean, apparently the thief has not been reading New York newspapers. I think there have been dozens of electric bike fires, some tragically fatal.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, Sterling, who is our number one electric bike hater on the panel, is not here today. But yeah, Steve is right. There's a lot of accidents with that. This is just kind of a bummer. This poor guy. It's funny because, well, I am a little bit confused though. This is a pedaling electric bike, right? Can you not ride an electric bike when the battery is dead?
It could be with an older person or something and they couldn't make the effort. It could be that the bike is so darn heavy with the batteries that it's not easy to pedal. Hard to say.
Yeah, but who's feeling it? I mean, it's like having a time bomb in your house. I mean, you just don't know what's going to happen, right?
Yes. Yeah. Explode version 6.0. Anyhow, so the next one up, this is an article that Linnea published on climaterealism.com this week. The conversation leans on flawed polling study to claim that climate change influences elections. I mean, what is there nothing that climate change can't do? Seriously.
Now this one is really funny too. Let me pull it up really quick because I was astonished at the article that accompanied this study. I didn't dig too deep into the study itself, but what one of the the authors wrote this article at the Conversation, and he said that the difference in numbers between people who voted or who have been polled and said, yes, I believe that climate change is an emergency or a problem, voted for Hillary Clinton at a rate of about 69% and voted for Biden in 2020 at about 77%. And they attribute that rise in people voting for a Democrat to people becoming more concerned with climate change. And I had to stop and reread
There's no other people but Democrats,
several
right?
times. Yeah. Well, I had to reread that several times because it occurred to me immediately that they didn't even consider, not even a little bit did they consider that maybe it's because Hillary Clinton was wildly unpopular even among Democrats compared to Biden. It's very, very poor, shoddy science. The whole thing comes off like it was, they're trying to shave the edges off of a square peg to fit it in the round hole in order to make it sound like climate change is an influencing factor for voters. And the craziest part of it is how hard they had to work to get to the result that they got. And the result still was that they could not determine whether or not climate change opinion influenced the 2020 election, which was the point of the entire study. But they offer educated guesses on how that could have happened anyway. And it's really a very poorly done piece of work there.
Educated guesses. That's like peer review, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't think of a single election where climate has been a major factor. Going back from the beginning, I mean, there's no President Al Gore because it was never that big a selling point. And then my favorite poll of all time is ahead of the 2022 election in the summer of 22. The New York Times had a poll which reported that only 1% of likely voters prioritize climate. That's pretty pathetic.
Yeah, the closest we ever came to having climate change being an issue in an election was, in fact, the presidential election with Al Gore. And thank goodness he didn't get elected, because who knows where we'd be today with climate craziness.
Right. And I wanted to add too, for our audience who don't know me personally and have not had this spiel from me before, because this is something I'll pound a drum on all the time. Polling is not meant to show reality, you guys. Polling is produced by these big organizations like Pew and stuff in order to influence the way that voters think and vote. So when you get a poll that comes out that says, 90% of people polled on climate change think that it's at least somewhat important, and the numbers are never that high, but I'm just giving an example. They're not doing that to show you that most of your friends think this. They're doing that to influence you to feel a little bit of peer pressure to start thinking that way. It's really not about showing reality. It's about influencing it. So just watch out when you see polling, you guys. Always be suspicious.
Yep, it is. We've seen some of the craziest polls out there where they just ignore a portion of reality to get the result they want, kind of like climate science,
Well, it's one thing to do a poll where you're asking someone, who are you going to vote for? Because that's a concrete action they're going to take. It's quite another thing to ask, like, do you believe in climate change or global warming or whatever? These really sort of soft, squishy questions, which really need a lot more information. And it's, most of the polls on climate are, do you believe in climate change? And well, the people being questioned or being polled don't really have all the information, so they can't really give you an intelligent answer like they can. Who are you going to vote for? They know what they're going to do there.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to our next story. This one is also something Linnea came up with. She posted it on our internal communications channel and says it's bogus. And we can see this full screen. It might be a little easier for people to get a handle on this. This startup says a massive plane could make wind energy viable. Now, get this, look at that. That's a football field underneath the airplane, right? And so this thing, it's a bigger airplane than anything that's ever been launched in the history of humanity. And yet they're talking about this pie in the sky. It's going to fix wind power. Linnea, can you explain this to me? I mean, what the heck are they thinking?
Sure. My dad sent me this I think maybe last night or this morning. I'm not sure when, but it blew my mind. The idea that now, because they can't build big enough, basically the idea is those super large turbines that are more efficient, according to renewables proponents. I'm maybe technically, but I'm kind of skeptical when you start factoring in transportation like this. These more efficient wind turbines are the bigger ones because they can reach different levels of the atmosphere where the wind patterns might still be stronger in one spot than they are in others, because wind is not uniform in the air. So the idea is make these things super huge. And right now, the biggest ones that we have are all offshore because you can deliver the components by barge. Well, you can't deliver the components for these super huge ones by truck to land locations as easily because you have to factor in turns and all sorts of like road conditions and stuff that are not necessarily as easily accessed, especially when you're trying to put these things up on like cliff edges and big mountain hills and everything. So what they're proposing here is to create an aircraft that can hold a coupled wind turbine blades and fly it out to location so that they can start putting in these super huge turbines. The problem with that is a super huge airplane requires a super huge landing strip. So they have to build like a packed dirt landing strip that's more than a mile long wherever it is that they're trying to make these deliveries. And it's just staggering the amount of effort that this would take. And I'm not convinced whatsoever that the efficiency increase from installing these massive turbines is actually going to be enough to make it make sense.
Well, I don't think you even need math to make it not make sense. Trying to get an airplane like this off the ground. I mean, the carbon footprint of this airplane's got to be huge. They would probably get more efficiency if they would just take the turbines on that airplane, the jet engines, and park them in front of a wind farm and just blow exhaust on them. You'd probably get more results out of that.
How dare you?
Well, I think Linnea's probably too young for this, but Anthony, you remember Howard Hughes and his Spruce Goose. That's what this thing looks like, right? Which is a big turkey of an airplane.
Yeah. You know, there was the name for the Howard Hughes airplane, the Spruce Goose.
Yeah.
I wonder what we could call this thing. Any ideas?
I think Jim just gave us a good one. Green Goose.
Silly Goose.
Ah. Green Goose. All right. Works for me. All right. We got a cartoon, sorta. It's our favorite mascot, Greta. Yes. See, now you can get a GPS program with Greta in there who will lecture you if you're not taking an eco-friendly route to your typical domicile or work or whatever. She'll scold you and then say, turn left here. Of course, this is from our friends at the Babylon Bee. You come up with some of the greatest biting satire on the planet. They come up with some fantastic stuff. And then finally, this is from our president, James Taylor, who posted this on our internal communications channel. And it's kind of summed up, yeah, this is right, you know. We need to ban fire before it hurts someone. It's the nannies, the original Neanderthal nanny state.
Right. So, I mean, if we operated under, this is like precautionary principle, we wouldn't have anything. We would still be in the caveman state because everything, can conceivably cause some harm someplace.
Yeah, indeed. All right. This next thing we've got is not a cartoon, but it's a video. And this video is from Congressman Doug LaMalfa, who's over in the 1st District in California. He's someone who follows me on a regular basis, and I talk to him from time to time when he asks questions. But he had this fantastic little takedown of some bureaucrats going on in a congressional hearing. And this takedown is really funny because he puts these bureaucrats on the spot And basically, they're just like, I mean, every climate skeptic in the world has more information about
Anything.
this than these guys. And it's hilarious what's going on here.
What percent of our atmosphere is CO2?
Repeat that question.
What percent of our atmosphere is CO2, carbon dioxide? Wild guess, it's okay.
I'll bite 5%.
5?
We'll go 7. That's my favorite number.
I'll see their 5 and suggest that we know that transportation causes 49% of CO2, so that's why we're all working on energy transition.
All right. So what number do you think it is?
5.
5? How about you? I didn't hear you, Mr. Dreher.
7.
7. Did you have one, Mr. Boyd?
So we got a 5, 7, 8. I'm going to hit the high end.
All right. The answer is 0.04%. Not 1%, not a half of a percent. It's 0.04%. And it's gone up from 0.03 over the last couple decades. This is what we're being all contorted into doing, is this tiny change in CO2. If we get below 0.02, plant life starts dying off.
Yep, he's right. And these folks that are making policy, pushing policy, I should say, they have no clue. 5%, 7%, 8%. They're off by a factor of 1,000 or more.
So it's not just these yahoos. It's also people that should know better. I've got video of Gina McCarthy, who was Obama's EPA chief and also Biden's climate czar. She's testifying in Congress. She has no idea how much carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere. And before she was Obama's EPA chief, she was the air chief. So if anyone should know, I mean, these are all the Obama war on coal rules were all hers. She has no idea how much carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere. And
I also, I couldn't help but notice that she said that 49% of CO2 comes from transportation. I don't know if she misspoke. Maybe she meant 49% of human emissions come from transportation, which I also am skeptical of. But 49% of CO2 in the atmosphere definitely does not come from transportation.
I think the commonly, the alarmist number is 20% of emissions are transportation related, 20% agriculture and so forth, but not 49. And these people don't even know the basics of their own hoax.
Yeah, we have a website called climateataglance.com, and I have a breakdown there on livestock and methane, but it talks about all emissions, and this comes from the EPA data, and they say 28.6% of all the greenhouse gas emissions in the United States come from transportation. So she's off by almost a factor of 2.
Yeah.
But that's a government bureaucrat for you. All they know is rhetoric and narrative. They don't seem to understand reality very well, right?
And they don't care. I mean, that's worse, right? They're not oh, that's really interesting. They don't care.
Yeah, if you scroll down there, Andy, you'll see a graph that outlines all this. There it is, right there. 28.6% over on the far right or far left. Yeah.
If there was to be another hearing with those same people, you could ask them the same question and they still would not know.
Yep. Anyway, this is what we're up against, folks. The uneducated are pushing policy, and that's the problem. And when you try to tell them about climate reality, they just, well, they never cover their mouths, but they do cover their eyes and ears.
Right.
All right, let's go on to Climate Fact Check. Now, this is a monthly feature that Steve Milloy produces from junkscience.com. We carry it on the climaterealism.com website. And so what we're going to do is go through each one of these topics that Steve has brought to attention this month. And you can shoot them down, Steve, like shooting fish in a barrel. It's not that hard.
Absolutely. That's what it's like. So where do you want to start?
Well, let's start with the first one.
Record. Okay, so we're in this El Nino, and it's warm, and that shows up on the the NASA satellite data, and that's what that graph is. That comes from the Roy Spencer's University of Alabama Huntsville, office, and so yeah, it looks like it's El Nino has caused warming, which any of us would have predicted a year ago. But I like to contrast it against there's guys that they have a website, temperature.global. They're supposed to do a real-time average of actual surface station measurements. And they showed that February was a little warmer, but not as warm as 2015, 2016. And so they show an overall cooling trend over the last 8-9 years.
Yeah, you got to understand that when you set your own baseline, like NASA GISS does, for example, and leave it on the old baseline from 1950 to 1980, everything looks much warmer because that baseline at that time, that was one of the coolest periods during global history. And so, everything looks much bigger in terms of warming when you deal with anomalies and baselines compared to dealing with absolute temperature. And as a matter of fact, if you were to try to discern the absolute temperature difference as a human living on this planet between 1850 and now, you couldn't feel it. Most people can't discern a difference of 1 degree Fahrenheit if they go between one room and another. And so, it's really small, but when we get magnified anomaly graphs and so forth, it becomes a big deal. And that's what the whole alarm is about.
Yeah. And I guess, what kind of disappoints me, even amongst the, from the UAH, is that there's, these are all estimates and there's no uncertainty. This is presented as the global temperature, and it's not whatever global temperature means. It's not that. It's just an estimate of it, and there's no uncertainty. So, you mentioned you can't really feel the difference between today's temperature and that of 1850. It's even more so between today's temperature and 2016, right? If you just look at that graph, you can't feel that difference. They can't measure that difference, but they don't represent it that way. They represent it as this is a point estimate. It's not even an estimate. We know that this is what it was. And I think it's just misleading.
Yeah, it is. But that's what climate science seems to have been since day one, misleading. They've taken small things and magnified them to make them into big issues that aren't really so big when you examine them in detail.
Right.
All right, let's move on to the next topic in climate fact check. Record hot in Dallas.
Yeah, so when I do these fact checks, I try to mix it up every month so it's not constantly the same thing. But this is a good example here in the Washington Post. We're talking about a record hot in Dallas in February. And, on February 26th, it was 93 degrees in Dallas, and that's a record temperature. Well, if you go back and look through the National Weather Service record, you find out that on February 25th in 1918, it was also 93 degrees. So, it's a record high for February 26th, but does that really mean anything? Why was it so hot on February 25th? Is that meteorologically different? I doubt it. It's just, the alarmists are looking for whatever excuse they can get to say, record hot or record this, record that. It's all record nonsense.
Right.
Yeah, and so February 25th, 1918, Dallas at 93 degrees. And what was the CO2 level back then?
Right.
Something like, I don't know, 350, something like that?
No, it was about 300.
All right. So, if we took all of our journalists and our climate policy experts and transported them back to 1918, the headline would be "Climate Change Causes Heat Wave in Dallas."
Yeah, right? and of course, now we have these. Everybody takes temperatures everywhere, so there's always going to be a new record somewhere. Someone's done an analysis on this, and there's always going to be a record low or a record high, and it doesn't really matter. It's just because of the record keeping.
We only have 150 years of good temperature records throughout the globe. The Earth has existed for billions of years.
Yeah.
So, we only have a tiny fraction of a small sample of total temperature records for the globe. So, it makes perfect sense that there's going to be a new high record and a new low record, on a regular basis. Yes, it will eventually get less as we get more time in under that, but it's crazy that they keep citing these records of proof of climate change when they don't mean anything in the long geographical, or rather geology context of the planet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it always drives me nuts when people pick a particular day and try to make claims about record, because there is a record being broken for particular days on particular weather conditions everywhere on the planet every single day forever, and it will continue that way forever. That's just the way that it works.
Yep. And I would point out to everyone who wants to send a letter to the editor or debunk on social media this stuff, is that climate change is about the average weather over 30 years. That's the established period. One day doesn't mean anything in the middle of all that.
Yeah.
All right. Doomsday Glacier. Yes, they always have to name these things, to make them scary. Doomsday Glacier, related to emissions. No. Icebergs and ice sheets calve all the time. They've done that throughout geologic history.
Yeah. Yeah, so in West Antarctica, there's a glacier called the Thwaites Glacier, and in 2017, a writer for Rolling Stone nicknamed it the Doomsday Glacier because it's supposed to, I guess if it breaks away, or melts, it's going to raise sea levels, I think 20 to 50 feet in 100 years. That's what they say. And of course, it's all tied to man-made global warming. Well, there was a study that came out last month that said what triggered the retreat of or whatever is going on with the Thwaites Glacier, I hesitate to give it a name. Whatever is going on started with an El Nino in the 1940s, which of course has nothing possible to do with emissions. And there've been a lot of other recent news stories sort of debunking this notion of Doomsday Glacier. I believe there was a study that came out last year said that, well, if the Thwaites Glacier disappears, we're looking at more like 1 millimeter or 2 millimeters of sea level rise over 50 to 100 years, not 20 to 50 feet. There's also, I believe, volcanic activity under the Thwaites Glacier. There's in West Antarctica. In Antarctica overall, there's been no warming in 70 years. In West Antarctica, there's been no warming over the past 20 years. None of this fits. The climate narrative is just totally bogus here.
Yeah. And they always have, like I said, they always have to name these things. I'm waiting for someone to produce a genetically modified cow that produces extra methane, just so someone can name it Doomsday Cow. Right?
Yeah, there you go. No, absolutely.
All right. This one here is just almost too stupid to talk about. And I applaud you, Steve, for being able to write this with a straight face. This next one, menopause worsened by global warming. Yeah. Where do they come up with this stuff?
Yeah, no, well, this is part of you've heard of the Biden administration all of government approach to climate. This is the all of life approach to government. Climate makes everything worse, apparently. And here I guess they're trying to appeal to women and scare women about, or you scare young women about, their coming menopause. It's really interesting because it says here that rising global temperatures aggravate the perception of hot flashes. So they even kind of admit, if you read it carefully enough, that climate's got nothing to do with menopause, but it aggravates the perception. And of course, there's not even a poll behind this, let alone a scientific study. It's just, at the Washington Post, they have a whole climate section and they fill it with nonsense every day. And, I spend every day looking at it and put it on my X feed when I can. But it's just incredible stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing what they get away with trying to publish or successfully publishing. And then the public, especially the ones that are low information types that can't logically put A, B, and C together, swallow this stuff without thinking it through.
Yeah.
Anyway, warming makes cherry blossoms bloom earlier. This is a story that's been going on for like 15 or 20 years. They're all concerned that the cherry blooms in Washington, are coming out earlier, and therefore it's a sign of climate change, right?
So this story is about cherry blossoms in Tokyo. The unfortunate thing for this story is that there's been no warming in Tokyo in the last 40 years. So there's that kind of counter narrative. Now, we have the same hysteria. I live in Washington, D.C., and we have the same hysteria going on now. When the cherry blossoms are going to peak earlier than usual, which is usually, I guess, around, well, the preferred time for tourists is the first week of April, but they may peak next week. And so the Washington Post is all in a kerfuffle about that. That's, of course, that's global warming. If they peak next week, that's going to be about the same time they peaked in 1921, which was, once again, 100 more than 100 ppm CO2 ago. Yeah.
Well, speaking of blooming, I can say this: climate change makes more blooming idiots.
Well, it is an interesting argument. The blooming earlier, the earlier onset of spring argument. There's a young guy on Twitter who is an atmospheric scientist student who mentioned or pointed out this morning, actually, but why is spring coming earlier a bad thing exactly? Doesn't that mean that we have a longer growing season so that we can produce more crops and feed more people? Where exactly is the detriment to having to schedule your trip to Japan or to DC a week earlier than you would have 50 years ago? I mean, it's not very well thought out. It's just kind of, people don't like change, and so they're using your fear of change to make you more likely to support climate action.
And I don't know even if it really is change. I mean, if you look at on the EPA website, they have a chart of cherry blossom peak dates for Washington, D.C., and it's all over the place. I mean, maybe statistically there is a trend, but of course that doesn't really, that's not a meaningful trend. I mean, every year it's different. Sometimes it's late, sometimes it's early. You can see it right there. It's all over the place. And, I don't even know how good the data is because things are constantly changing. And I know that climate alarmists lie about everything. So I just don't trust anything. Especially just, a graph like that. What does it really mean? It doesn't mean anything. Look at 2015. Around then, they bloomed really late, and this year they're going to bloom a little earlier, but not as early as 1990. About as early as 1921. What does any of this mean? It doesn't mean anything. It's just junk.
Yeah, I will point out that the data does not go back any further than about 1920 because the cherry trees in Washington, D.C. were a gift from the Japanese government to the American people prior to World War II, before they got mad at us and decided to go after, Pearl Harbor. But the point is that we don't have that much data on it. And if you look at it, it's up and down and up and down and up and down. There's no trend in this, no matter how hard you look. I mean, particularly since the levels that we have now in the near present are very close to what we saw, in 1920, 1930 and so forth.
Yeah. And I just got to say, like today in the Washington Post, one of their capital weather guys had an article where he said in Washington, D.C. has been warming at a rate of about 0.3 of a degree per decade. So that means that since 1900. So that means since 1900, per his calculations, Washington, D.C. has warmed, 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. But if you look at the urban heat island for Washington, D.C., it's almost 5 degrees.
Right.
So Washington, D.C. is actually cooling.
Well, you could say the same thing about Tokyo. They've got the same problem with a big UHI signature there.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe these cherry trees are just missing Japan. It's hard to say. All right. Canadian zombie fires caused by climate? Question.
Yeah. So these zombie fires in Canada, I had never heard of these things before, but apparently, they've been happening. They've been happening since always. Anytime there's a wildfire in Canada, the peat will catch on fire and will smolder. And so I guess Canadians spend wintertime putting these smoldering peat fires out. However, this year, because of all the wildfires they had last year, there were so many, these zombie fires, they couldn't put them all out. So, of course, that's global warming. Now, as I recall, the Canadian wildfires, once again, they have nothing to do with emissions. It's poor forest management. I know in Canada, they used to have a youth program where they were planting these particular sort of cedar trees. I believe they were cedar trees, which the firefighters called gasoline on a stick. And so, if you have bad forest management with all these trees that are gasoline on a stick, well, of course, Canada is going to burn down. And once again, this has got nothing to do with climate. This is just there were so many fires left over from last year they couldn't put them out.
Yeah, wasn't there an arsonist involved in some of the Canadian fires?
Yeah. I think there were 14 cases of arson in Canada.
Right. Okay, speaking of fires, Chilean wildfires worsened by climate? No, it's weather, and I can tell you why. Because I go back to my old maxim that I used to say on the air all the time. It's chilly tonight and hot tamale.
So, of course, the past year has really been colored by El Nino, right? El Nino has, done its thing and has warmed certain places and cooled other places, caused more rain, caused drought, as it usually does. And, every time there's an El Nino, you get drought in South America. And so with drought, you can get wildfires. And that's what's happened. And it's not climate. It's just El Nino. Things will change this year. We're going to go into a La Nina soon, if we're not already. And so this year will be different. It won't be climate. It'll just be, the ENSO cycle.
Yeah. But, how many people are climate change going to kill? I say again and again, I've yet to see a death certificate signed by a coroner that says climate change killed this person.
Yeah. No, well, you may be killed by weather. I mean, that's possible, but you're not going to be killed by climate change. As you mentioned earlier, climate is at least 30 years. No one dies over a period of 30 years. People die from weather. They can die from in weather catastrophes, but not from climate.
Yeah, if someone dies from heat stroke during a heat wave, that's weather, not climate. Because, 2 years ago, there wasn't a heat wave in the same place or whatever. It's the same thing with cold. It's absurd the lengths that these folks go to try to stretch and manipulate in some kind of a climate change angle into normal everyday events that happen all over the world.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've had before industrialization, before fossil fuels, before emissions, less than 1 billion people on the planet. Now after all the fossil fuels been burned and all the emissions and all the warming, we've got more than 8 billion. They won't even look at just the reality of the situation. Warming, as Linnea pointed out, warming is good for humanity. It's good for society. We can produce more food. That's how we have more people. Malthus in the 18th century predicted famine because he did not foresee the development of technology. Paul Ehrlich predicted in the 1960s, predicted famine in the 1970s because he's an idiot. Fossil fuels have been a gift from God for humanity because we've been able to feed everybody. And I
always thought it was a gift from the dinosaurs.
Yep, Dino was thinking of us.
Yeah. All right. Polar bears to starve. We go through this, every 2 years now?
Yeah, if not more often. Yeah. So supposedly, there's going to be less ice and fewer polar bears. Of course, there are more polar bears now than there have been in the past 60 years. In these particular places where they were worried about having less ice, they have the same amount of ice. There's no change in the ice. There's plenty of polar bears. What turned the trick in producing more polar bears was, hunting restrictions. So, the natives are not allowed to hunt them to extinction. So now we have plenty of polar bears. And I guess they can't give up on environmentalists can't give up on the polar bear because it was one of their early symbols of global warming. It's just not working out for them.
Yeah, I think the solution is they should take polar bears and genetically modify them with genes from something that would survive most anything. I mean, like combine the genes between cockroaches and polar bears so that you've got this super polar bear that lives forever, even through nuclear war. And then we won't have to worry.
How dare you?
Well, but Anthony, I mean, polar bears already can survive. And polar bears don't need ice to survive. I mean, they're just bears. Bears that
the only thing that needs ice to survive is lounge lizards. I'm sorry, I'm just in a funny mood today. All right, Texas wildfire caused by climate change.
Yeah.
Really? No.
Well, yeah. Too late for this fact check. We found out that that Xcel Energy, which is a net zero utility, their equipment malfunctioned and started this huge fire in Texas. So, it's a record fire, but also Texas has always had these fires, and we don't know how large they were in the past. They're conceivably larger. So this just happens to be poor land management, poor utility management, an El Nino year. It's just what these things happen. It's got nothing to do with emissions.
Right. The final one of the climate fact check. I really love this one because of the picture that they used with the caption. Can we see this full screen? Because this is hilarious. It says, scientists are freaking out about ocean temperature. Now look at this guy. He's got his hand in his pocket and standing there. Does he look freaked out to you? I mean, is that what freaked out science looks like?
Yeah. So what the big driver of ocean temperatures is the sun. It just is. The atmosphere doesn't really warm the ocean, maybe the top millimeter or so. There might be some, warming from beneath, from geothermal. There was on No Trick Zone yesterday, they posted a new study about how there's been increasing solar radiation, possibly warming the ocean. So it's got nothing to do with emissions.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you for doing that climate fact check every month, because if you didn't do it, nobody else would.
Oh, well, the last, we got to do the last one because this is the funniest. I think it's the funniest one. The editor.
Oh, I didn't see that one. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So the editor of Science Magazine, editor-in-chief, called up the guys that do Mythbusters on the Discovery Channel.
Oh,
and
right.
He wanted to know if they could do a show, showing people how, basically how, us climate deniers are wrong. That would be the myth busting. But the Mythbusters guys said, we really can't do that. We can't show that climate change is caused by humans.
Yeah. It's science communication lately has just gone off the rails. It really has. Yeah. They've given up factual discourse and they've gone towards rhetoric and narrative and everything else, and they still won't let go of RCP 8.5 climate model, which forecast, this hellish future for humanity, which can't even happen because there's not enough fossil fuels on the planet to burn to put CO2 in the atmosphere to get to those model levels. It's just impossible. Mm-hmm. But let's not let facts get in the way. All right. We're now on to climate potpourri. We're going to just do a little bit of everything that we've looked at this week, seen on the interwebs, some of the crazy stuff that's being published. One of the first ones that I noticed was follow the science leads to ruin. And it's true. It seems to me that these folks that are following the science, per se, aren't really paying attention to the kind of draconian measures that they're putting into place to try to solve climate change. And it seems to me that the cure is worse than the disease.
Yeah. Linnea, you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty well established at this point that most of the time the policies that are getting pushed are more harmful, maybe even in the same exact way that the cure that they're claiming that they're going after was harmful, or the problem that they're going after was harmful. There's a phrase in computer programming that is, the purpose of a system is what it does. And so when you look at these climate policies that lead to economic ruin, they lead to all sorts of nightmare conditions for people. They lead to people having not as dependable electricity and stuff, you have to wonder. I mean, at this point, the warning has been out, and the examples of this happening over and over again have been out for so long that probably the purpose of the system is what it does in the case of the climate policy that we see getting pushed.
So Anthony, the thing that drives me crazy about that op-ed in the Wall Street Journal is written by Bjorn Lomborg. And so, Bjorn Lomborg's shtick is that, climate is real. It's just not a priority. And if we're going to do something, then we need to apply a cost benefit test. Well, from my perspective, climate is this giant hoax and there's no benefit from doing anything. So why do anything? And, Lomborg, and there are people like him, I guess you could call them lukewarmers, they want to pretend that IPCC science is real. So, and then, well, yeah, I accept that global warming is real, but it's just not a very high priority, or we should, minimize or not worry about it so much. Why not just come out and say the whole thing's a hoax? There's no science behind it. There's no there. Anything you do, even if it only costs a nickel, is a waste of money, waste of time, waste of resources. There's just no point in it. And, I've tried to get Lomborg to debate this. He won't. Maybe if he's watching or someone could share this with him, let's have it out on this. Because he's got this relationship with the Wall Street Journal. He's constantly writing the same thing. Global warming is real, but we shouldn't do anything about it. No, it's a hoax. We don't need to do anything about it. We need to move on. We need to get rid of people in policy positions who think it's real.
Yeah.
Right. But do you think, Steve, that there's a tactical advantage to having someone like that getting, coverage in the Wall Street Journal, though? Because, otherwise, if it wasn't for him, they would have, at this point, because of the way that they curate their op-eds and stuff, they would have nothing from even halfway to our side on this. So I don't know. I think
yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, and I've heard that, and there's a point to that. However, I don't think it behooves us to pretend any of this is real. I mean, he could write the same piece and just leave out the part that, yes, climate is a problem. I mean, that sentence does not really help it at all. He could just say, well, whatever we do, we should do a cost benefit analysis, and I can accept that. And we can determine that there really are no benefits, so that even spending a nickel is not good. But I mean, he goes out of his way to try to maintain some sort of credibility. Anybody that believes that really doesn't know what they're talking about, or is not going to be is not being honest. So I don't know, man. I hear this all the time. Well, he's on our side. He's trying to be reasonable, and you got these alarmists and you got your deniers. And so maybe somebody in the middle is right. Well, I'm not one of I don't buy into that.
Yeah, I want to point out that the things that humans do best to solve problems in their environment is adaptation. And we've done a great job with this, with weather, for example. It used to be that tornadoes were a big problem in the United States, and hundreds would be killed from a single tornado event because there was no warning. By the same token, the same problem with hurricanes. The giant incident that happened in Galveston, Texas over 100 years ago because there was no warning and because people were living on this low-lying island is still one for the record books. But what we've done over the past century is we've invested in better weather forecasting, we've invested in Doppler radar, we've invested in warning systems, and so forth and so on. And tornado deaths as well as hurricane-related deaths have gone way down. In fact, all deaths associated with anything associated with weather and climate have gone down because we've adapted and we've gotten better at forecasting it and we've gotten better at warning for it. And so this is really climate in a nutshell. Climate is just an average of weather over 30 years, and everyone's worried about the future. Climate's going to destroy humanity. Well, the track record so far has shown humanity's done just fine in the face of odds like that.
Yeah, I mean, if Lomborg or anybody else could show me how, reducing emissions or painting rooftops and streets white, which is one of the things he suggested years ago. If you could show me how any of these things is going to reduce tornado deaths better than improving warning systems, well, let's see it. But they never do that. They're bent on this emissions cutting theme. No, come hell or high water.
Yep. Yep, indeed. All right, so I want to go on to our next topic, and that is Biden wants $8 billion, Dr. Eol, $8 billion for the Climate Corps. Can you imagine? I talked about merging cockroaches and polar bears before. Now we've got the Hitler Youth and the Climate Corps together, right?
Well, yeah.
Listen, to me, this is probably a big waste of money, but there is one thing that I'll say. If it's people going around clearing brush in like wildfire prone areas and clearing out deadfall and that kind of thing, if that's what they're talking about when they say that they want people to be on a climate corps, then I have a hard time complaining about it, although other than nitpicking the name and the mission statement, right? But if this is like, they're gonna be patrolling in the streets, knocking on your door if your energy use is too high, that's where I'm gonna start being worried about it.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
there was this fantastic Super Bowl commercial a few years ago. It was about 10 years ago, I think. It was called The Green Police. And it was a fantastic commercial about, the green police showing up at your door, making sure that you had twisty bulbs and you weren't throwing batteries in the trash and stuff like that. And that's exactly what the image goes through my mind of what this Climate Corps might be about.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's jobs for remember Pajama Boy from the from Obamacare. It can be jobs for him to blog about climate. Maybe they can aspire to work at the Washington Post and blog on climate. But what are they going to do? This is, they try to model it after the Civilian Conservation Corps of the New Deal, which was a lot of, make work to make it through the Depression. This is make work just to advance the climate agenda.
Yeah, it's nutty. It really is. I hope he doesn't get that $8 billion because who knows what kind of damage he could do, not only to the United States, but to the youth that are involved with the brainwashing they're going to go through.
Yeah, mind is a terrible thing to waste.
Yeah. All right. So a Republican Climate Caucus? Yes, it exists and it's growing. Yeah.
Yeah, so
there's the semi-truck electrification. Well, I was going to skip ahead and get to the Republican Climate Caucus because we were kind of running out of time. But let's talk about this briefly. California wants to ban all of the internal combustion engines, and they want to make semi-trucks the big deal. And so we have major ports in California. San Diego, Los Angeles, and even San Francisco, although not much comes through there anymore because who wants to go to San Francisco these days? So the problem is they're trying to mandate out-of-state truckers to have these electric vehicles, because we don't want your dirty pollutions in our state. Yet we want you to come in and take the goods from our ports and distribute them so we can get, the revenue on that or whatever. And that's the problem. It's just not going to work. And the enormous costs are going to hit consumers. And Steve, you pointed out almost every time we get into something that's supposedly green, there's a big cost and a big failure associated with it.
Yeah. Well, this is another thing what's the benefit here? It's pretty easy to show that if the United States went, dark today and remained dark forever, the vast majority of global emissions would still occur. So what's the point of this? If they were going to say, well, it's going to reduce conventional pollutants, well, at least we could, then talk about whether that makes sense. But with this climate stuff, the whole thing is just crazy. There's no way you could ban trucks. You could ban the United States. It's not going to affect the climate.
No. It's just more shouting at the sky.
Andy, what's going on? That I said for the Q&A portion.
All right, so let's just go straight to Q&A and pop up our first question if we have.
Sure thing.
Yeah. Go for it, Linnea.
All right, so our first question is for you, Anthony.
Oh.
What's the status of Anthony's weather station and how much is it going to cost?
Well, the status is, like any endeavor involving technology, you have to do a lot of testing. And I've been doing a lot of testing over the past year. There were some bugs to work out, and there were some quality control issues to work out because, anything that I produce for use in monitoring temperature has to be absolutely perfect and above reproach, because any alarmist that finds the slightest little niggle of a problem is going to inflate that into the whole thing's a piece of crap. That's what they're going to say. So I've been working very diligently to get the whole thing, very reliable. We've had tests all throughout the United States on this project. We've had tests in Australia on this project. And I'm happy to say it's working really well. Now, we learned some things, particularly when it came to do with hot temperatures and electronics and things like that. So we'll have more information on that coming up in a future show. But for right now, let's just say we're working on it and we're getting very, very good at it. And I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Okay, so this is what I asked for that graphic to be brought up for. Doug asks, how much have the sea levels in New York City risen? Not a whole lot, I imagine. Well, over time, we actually have quite a few sea level stations in New York across the state. The Battery is the usual one that you pull up for New York, just because it's right at the tip of Manhattan there. And yeah, I mean, it's been going at a relatively stable rate of about 0.09 millimeters per year. So there is a rise, but it's not exactly alarming looking at that. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. All right.
Yeah, so I think, Anthony, you pointed out the New York Department of Environmental Conservation said that, or predicted that sea levels was going to rise. What was it?
13 inches by the mid 2030s.
Right, and it's really it's been a tenth of that over the past 150 years. So
yeah, and they're basing this projection on that idiotic RCP 8.5 model.
Yeah,
where they have these insane projections where everything's going to accelerate, and to get to this point that they're predicting of 13 inches by the mid 2030s of sea level rise in New York, the sea level would have to accelerate to over 10 times the current rate of rise. Yeah. And that's never happened in the whole history of sea level measurements, period. And it's not going to happen. The whole thing is a complete bit of junk science, to coin a phrase.
Good one.
Right. Well, this one isn't a question per se, but I want to make sure that we get to it because, Steve, this is right up your alley, and I thought I would bring it up just to trigger you. Luke says, reducing emissions have the excellent side benefits of reducing air pollution in our cities, improving the health of citizens living there.
Yes.
Love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so, okay. 50, 60 years ago, the air wasn't as clean as it could be. That said, air quality in the United States, for the most part, has always been an aesthetic issue, not a public health issue. There was one problem in the United States in October 1948 in Donora, Pennsylvania, which is located in the valley. There was a temperature inversion, and they didn't turn off one of the industrial plants that emitted acidic gases into the air, and about 20 people died. Outside of that, no one has ever been on record sickened or killed by air quality in the United States. Now, over the past 50 to 60 years, since we've had, all these, the Clean Air Act and Clean Air Act amendments and EPA and better technology, we have cleaned up our air. I've been working on environmental issues for more than 30 years. When I first started in 1990, the air was clean. There were, you can violate EPA standards, but the EPA standards are not science-based. They're based on, on technology, however clean you can make the air. So this notion that our air needs to be cleaned is ridiculous. Our air is clean. It is safe. And spending more money to reduce air pollution is just throwing good money after nothing. This would be a good point for Bjorn Lomborg to come in and say, well, let's do a cost benefit analysis, which we never do.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now we have Anthony and Linnea. Do you think that CO2 emissions can truly prevent Earth from entering the next glaciation? My answer is no. My answer is no, based on the paleo, the historical data that's shown that there have been periods where we've been in a major glaciation, not just something like the Little Ice Age, where carbon dioxide was actually way higher than it is today. So no, I don't think that at all.
Yeah, I have a more scientific interpretation than Linnea. No and hell no. Anyway, seriously, the amount of precession and so forth, Milankovitch cycles, all that stuff is far greater than CO2 forcing. So yeah, what we might end up with is an ice age that instead of having an average temperature, in the glaciated areas of 10 degrees Fahrenheit, we might see an average temperature of 11 degrees Fahrenheit, which makes a huge difference in the whole scheme of things, right?
Right. Okay. Our next question is, wouldn't it help the whole carbon debate if the greenhouse effect is firstly put to bed completely?
Well, of course, the greenhouse effect is a misnomer, right? It's the greenhouse effect is not how greenhouses warm. So
No.
it's just a bad name all around.
It is, there's convection involved and transport, all this other stuff. But let's not get into that. But yeah, the greenhouse effect is a misnamed thing. In essence, what we really have is, yes, there is a real effect of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but it's not huge like some people claim. We have infrared radiation, especially at night, that comes up from the ground. It's a natural process, been occurring since the Earth existed. We've got these little infrared waves of photons going up from the Earth at night, and they collide with CO2 molecules because they happen to have a resonance that matches the frequency of the photons and so forth. Bottom line is, it causes some deflection and slowing of the photons going up to the top of the atmosphere. It basically slows, to some small extent, the radiation of heat up into space. And that's all it is. And it's nothing like the greenhouse effect where you've got restricted convection and things like that with glass panes and that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's a complete misnomer.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the next question is, what is causing El Nino? Is it us, or what are the other factors?
Well, El Nino's been going on for time immemorial. It's been a natural process. We only recently identified it in like the last 40 years or so. And it's been going on. And the reason it's called El Nino is because it tended to happen around Christmas time. And the words El Nino, the boy, referred to the Christ child associated with Christmas time. And it was coined by people in Mexico, particularly fishermen who noticed changes in the ocean. And this has been going on long before carbon dioxide emissions ever became an issue, long before climate change was ever even a phrase. And so, no, we don't cause it, and we never will. And we're not making it worse either.
Well, that's all the questions that I have marked here. So I think we are pretty well done on that. But thank you guys so much. And thank you to the audience for all of your questions. This was really good. We've got a lot of compliments for you, Steve, in the comments there as well. Thank you for being on.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right. So we got one final thing to cover, and then we're going to sign off. I want to tell you about a new app that has been produced by the Heartland Institute for the Climate at a Glance website. People have been asking for months about this, and this climate app is basically an at a glance. You can just look it up on your phone and see the debunking of different topics, like El Nino, for example. Find out what it is, how it's occurred, what's driving it, that kind of stuff. These kinds of topics are on the Climate app. And all you have to do is search on either the Apple Store or the Android Play Store for Climate at a Glance. Just look for that. And you can download it and try it out. Just introduced a couple of days ago for Android, and it's been out about a week for iOS. We hope you'll download it and make use of it and try it out. So that pretty much sums it up. So again, I want to thank everybody for being on and thank you for joining us today. Thanks for all the great questions. Also want to say that I want you to visit our website, climateataglance.com. energyatatglance.com, and climaterealism.com, where you'll find a daily debunking of some of the craziest stories put out by the media about climate change. So that's it for us today. I want to thank everyone again and say I'm Anthony Watts, Senior Fellow for Environment and Climate at the Heartland Institute, wishing you all a great Friday and a fantastic weekend. Bye-bye.
He's a lying, dog-faced pony soldier.